Hello, friends. Welcome to Backstage with Gig Performer. My name is Brett Pontecorvo, and we are here every Thursday checking out some of the coolest rigs we can find. We're working with pros, we're working with semi-pros, we are all over the place, but we are so happy to have you guys joining us today. If you are watching, do let us know in the comments where you are coming in from. We would love to hear from you. I know over here in New York, we've had several days of almost summer, and then this morning it was like 28 degrees outside. So if you're getting frozen out too, let us know. But we're so happy that you're here. Today we actually have a super cool episode that actually keeps getting more and more interesting, featuring Ken. But before we get to that, I want to let you guys know that next week we have Chris Bartley coming on, who I do know is a longtime viewer of Backstage, and he's going to show us how he is using some Ableton magic to listen to his drummer and then send the tempo of the drummer actually playing in real time into Gig Performer to keep everything in time without a metronome. So if that's interesting to you, do make sure you are back next week at the same time to check out that rig. But without further ado, I do want to let you know today Ken is coming on. Ken Matson, he is a long-time keyboard player, and you might know him because he is a moderator in the Keyboard Players and Cover Bands Facebook group. So perhaps you are a member of that group and you've known him there. But I'm going to pull him on in so we can see what's going on. Welcome to Backstage, Ken.
Hey, everybody. Hi. Glad to be here.
Dude, thanks so much for coming on. I'm like thinking through everything I've seen today. I'm so excited to share your setup. It's wild. Before we jump into to all things GP, can you just share a little bit about yourself so everybody can be up to speed on who you are and what you do?
Sure. First thing and most important thing, married 37 years coming up, 5 kids, 6 grandkids.
Congratulations.
That's the important stuff.
Wow,
but I've been a keyboard player, well, technically since the late 60s when I started my piano lessons as a kid, but in bands since the late 70s, played heavily during the 80s and 90s, during the 2000s, a little less, as I was very involved with my other career, which is software. And then in the teens, actually bought a full-time commercial studio and ran that for 10 years, on and off with some gigs, gigging a little bit around that then. And then in the last 5 or 6 years, I've got back into gigging pretty good.
Wow. So you were playing during a season where there was a lot of hardware happening. Did you own every keyboard, or how many keyboards did you go through?
I have owned, I don't know why I kept up with this, but I got a little spreadsheet, and I'm up to around 65 keyboards that I've owned in my life. Now, I don't have very many now. I've got 3 or 4 controllers and a Nord.
Okay.
That's sort of my keyboards at the moment. But yeah, I grew up with Hammonds and clavinets and Rhodes and CP70s and all the big polysynths and you name it.
Did you also have a giant van to move all of your gear?
We had like a U-Haul sized truck or Ryder truck or something the band owned, and that's what we moved to do. Because back then the PA speakers were the size of a wall too. So.
Right. So were you like connecting all of your stuff together? Were you like running MIDI cables from your keyboards to your other keyboards and all of that, or just playing them one at a time?
Like I said, I'm a software nerd, so I am a techie nerd. So as soon as MIDI came in, I jumped right on it. And the first time I was able to MIDI my a DX7 at the time to I think it was a memory mode that had MIDI on it. I thought that was the coolest thing in the world, that I could get both sounds at once out of playing one keyboard.
Yeah.
Later, as MIDI got a little more advanced and I understood it a little better, I actually went to a Roland A80 controller and quite a few modules. Plus, I don't know if everybody remembers MSB, who was it, J.L. Cooper or somebody made a MIDI connectivity routing device that you could press your main program and it would set up what goes where and do patch changes and all that. So I was doing a pretty heavy MIDI setup, including a lot of sequencing, primarily in the early 90s with that stuff.
Wow. Wow. So you were early adopter, I guess, of all things tech. I'm like, just still kind of blows my mind, but that's awesome. So I guess you also probably really cut your teeth just on learning how to use those things, right? Like you were super comfortable on like synthesizers and all of that stuff, like when hardware was a thing.
Yeah, I got when it was about 1978 or so. I got a Korg MS-20, which is a little monophonic synthesizer with the little
Yes, I
patch
know it.
cables and
Yeah.
everything. And it really cut my teeth on learning about subtractive synthesis and what cutoff meant and what an envelope was and all those
Mm-hmm.
sort of things. And then I moved
Mm-hmm.
on to a Mini Moog and then, various polysynths, including
Mm-hmm.
Memory Moog I mentioned, Jupiter 8,
Mm-hmm.
the DXs,
Mm-hmm.
D50 at some point, all that stuff.
What was that like? So I'm like, I guess I'm asking this question, but just for clarity, like you mentioned you like started taking piano lessons, right? Like standard kid piano lessons. Then you're kind of getting into this rock and roll thing, and you're trying to make these other sounds. What was that like for you mentally? I guess I'm asking because when I first started to play synths, it took a long time for me to realize that it was not the same instrument. Was there a learning
Yeah,
curve for
it
you in
was
that?
really different.
Yeah.
I learned, like you said, the typical kid piano lessons, and I got pretty
Yeah.
advanced in that because I did 8 or 9 years of lessons, I think.
Yeah.
And but that got me into my teenage years where it's the whole rock and roll thing or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly, I got into CB radios at one time, which was a big thing during that
Mm-hmm.
time.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I ended up trading my CB radio setup to a guy for his guitar and his amp, just
Mm-hmm.
a little cheap thing,
Mm-hmm.
and thought I'd be a guitar player. And after about a week or two of trying that, I said, "This sucks. I'm going to play something that I know how to play."
Yeah.
So I started trying to learn, to play some pop songs, rock songs on the piano, picking them out. And at some point, I got taken to a music store and saw some synthesizer. I don't even know what it was. It was probably an old Roland or Cork, maybe at that time. And I was enamored from that point on. And got my parents bought me a Yamaha Electone organ. It was one of these little home spinet organs, but it had a cool feature where it had a little built-in monophonic synthesizer on the top keyboard you could use. It was a real
Mm-hmm.
synth, not a
Mm-hmm.
lot to it, but it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started playing that and got my friends together and had a little band in the basement at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty soon I bought that MS-20, and everybody in my town thought I was the coolest thing on earth because I had this, cockpit looking synthesizer.
Yeah.
Then just sort of moved up from there. My high school band was relatively successful for a little high school band. I added a Rhodes, I think, at that point. And and then right after I got out of high school, I ended up in a much more serious band with people that were a lot older than me.
Mm-hmm.
But keyboard players, as now sometimes, were hard to find back then. And I went through all kinds of equipment at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is kind of interesting. Like I'm listening to you talk and I'm like, oh, this is the genesis for you. Like once you can see possibility, things start to move so much more quickly, right?
Yeah.
Because you're just like, oh
yeah.
Now I know.
Yeah, and one thing that really led to that was at one point, how bands have, I'll call them personnel problems.
Yeah.
At one time, I found myself with just me, a singer who was really good, a girl singer, and the guitar player. And we were tired of trying to find drummers and bass players, and said, you know what, I'm going to program all this stuff. So sure enough, I got an Ensoniq SQ80, which had a pretty decent little 8-track sequencer on it. I had an Alesis HR15, is that what it was? Drum machine. And I went through and programmed the whole night's worth of drums and bass and extra keyboard parts and everything. And we went for quite a while as a 3-piece doing that, and people loved us.
Wow.
And I'd kick off the sequences. Later, we got a drummer and kept doing the sequences, minus the drums, of course, at that point. And people loved us. So we said, why not? So that was a lot of my schooling was trial by fire there.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like a lot of work with people building keyboard rigs, and the common thread I'm listening to you talk is this. It's that trial by fire. It's really just when you have a clear problem to solve, you learn much faster.
Yep.
Right.
And the other thing, and this is kind of what's led me to almost the topic of the discussion today. My
Yeah.
biggest time playing, where I was playing for weeks at a time, night after night,
Yeah.
6 nights a week, 3 weeks in a row kind of
Yeah.
stuff, was in the late in the well, actually throughout the 80s at different times and through the early 90s. And during that whole time, I was playing top 40 music, which
Mm-hmm.
was what we would call 80s music for the most
Mm-hmm.
part these days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of band I found myself back in, as an 80s band.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's stuff that I really, really enjoyed playing and had a lot of fun with, because I'm one of these people, and some people will kind of poo-poo this, but I'm one of these people that enjoys the technology and setting up the stuff and
Mm-hmm.
finding sounds and mapping it all out
Mm-hmm.
pretty much as I do playing it. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yeah.
that's the nerd in me coming out.
Yeah, but you do have a stand apart thing that I'm noticing, and everybody's going to see this is, a lot of people who are into the tech fall into the trap of not prioritizing the music. But we're going to see in a second here, like, your musical polish is as strong as your technical polish, which I think is one of the things that makes this rig so extraordinary to me.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah, man. Okay, so we know you have a massive background in all of this stuff. How did you end up in Gig Performer downsizing from a giant U-Haul van to one
Yeah.
keyboard controller? What was that process?
Well, first of all, I haven't done the giant U-Haul stuff since probably the 90s. But
Okay.
even then, just maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was going around with a Nord Stage 3 and a Phantom 6,
Mm-hmm.
which were, fairly, especially the Phantom, fairly, for a guy who's getting a little older,
Mm-hmm.
heavy keyboards.
Yeah.
I don't, maybe it's lazy, it's some legitimate health concerns, but I just didn't want to carry around the weight anymore. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to have to take time to set up. I didn't want to be there with the drummer as the last guy out the door.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wanted to, have something that I could set up quick, was easy to play, and could tear down quick, didn't weigh too much, could throw in the back of my SUV and go, and at the same time not sacrifice any sound.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I kind of moved gently into it. I got rid of the Phantom and went to a controller along with the Nord and
Mm-hmm.
GP. That was my first introduction to Gig Performer. Pretty soon I realized I don't really need the Nord. Doggone, it weighs 20 something pounds and I could be down to 12 pounds. So I did it. And then I was going around for a while with two 61 key controllers in GP.
Mm-hmm.
And then just last fall, I guess, I decided, you know what? I could probably do this with one 88 key controller and Gig Performer, and it would make my setup really simple and light and easy. And sure enough, it has.
Yes. Dave Bolden just wrote in, and I think this is hilarious. You can tell which era a keyboard player comes from by the amount of back problems they have.
That's right. I tell you what, I have packed up roads up and down stairs by myself, and people will know how heavy that is.
Yeah.
I've, with one other person, carried a B3 up and down stairs, and you know how heavy that is. So
Yes.
I don't ever want to do that again.
It's too funny. Oh my goodness. What do you remember what GP version you came in on? When did you discover it?
It hasn't been all that long ago, maybe a couple years ago.
Okay.
It was probably 3. I don't know. I'm guessing. I
Okay.
was there right as it was going over to 4.
And were you using any other software host before that? No.
Nope,
Okay.
not at all.
Okay. All right. So I'm trying to think if I've missed anything on the front end, but I think. Oh, one other question, and then we'll jump into your GP rig. How did you end up moderating keyboard players and cover bands? How did that happen?
Well, first I just found the group, and like everybody else, and
Yeah.
contributed a fair amount. And then
Mm-hmm.
one day I get a text from Tammy Catcher, who is the main admin there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and said, "Hey, would you be interested in being a moderator?" And I said, "Hey, why not?"
Yeah.
And it's been it was like 2.5 years now, so it's been good.
Awesome. Yeah. So for folks who are watching, if you are not on that group, it is a wealth of wonderful information with a lot of really skilled, really kind people. So definitely worth checking out that group. Okay, Ken, let's share what we got going on here. What do you want to show first? Should I show your overhead of your keyboard, or should I share the
Well,
screen?
maybe they could see what all we've got. You've seen me here, and that's enough of
Okay.
that.
Okay.
So maybe the keyboard and GP.
Okay. All right.
So you can
So
see
I've
I've
got
got
up.
my 88 keyboard here.
Yep.
What you can't see is a Pacer foot controller, 10 switch MIDI foot controller with an expression pedal underneath me. And
Hmm.
that's my whole rig, along with the computer and interface.
And is this like you've got your computer mounted there? Like, is this what it when you take it on stage? Is this what it is? Like exactly like this?
That's it. That's it. The
Wow.
computer is mounted on the top tier of the keyboard stand, a little crossbar I found to put across.
Okay.
So it's right in front of me, and that's it. I think we had a picture somewhere of it, but yeah.
Okay. This is awesome. And then I've totally lost my train of thought. That's okay. So this is how it gets set up, just this way. And then how long would you say it takes you to set it up?
Depends on how much help I have because I'm lazy. But maybe 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay. That's awesome. And do you one of those people who has like a very strict setup routine, like you do everything in the exact same order every single time, or you just kind of plug it in and get going?
The most important things for me to get set up are the stand where everything's
Okay.
going on, and
Yep.
my stool where I can sit and do the rest of it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I do have, a couple legitimate things where I can't stand for very long. So
Okay.
I'm not kidding when I say, I get somebody maybe help me plug in the pedal board down there, those kind of things.
Yep.
But yeah, I set that up, and then it's pretty easy. The keyboard's next. The interface sits. I don't know if you can see it there. Yeah,
Yep.
here's the interface right over here,
Mm-hmm.
and the computer just plugs into that and the keyboard, and I've got
Mm-hmm.
2 audio outs, and then I got coming back for my IAMs. I've got a feed, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So it's a very fast setup. And do you know roughly how much your controller weighs?
I think this is about 18 pounds. It's an Ovation launch key 88 MK3, so it'll be easy to look up, but I think
Okay.
it's about 18 pounds.
Awesome. Okay. So you've moved down to one keyboard, but you mentioned mostly you play 80s music, which
Yes.
means that is it like just as simple as you have like one sound per key, like about 88 sounds per patch, or how does that
Sometimes it seems that way. I can tell you this, people, I do have at least one rack space per song.
Yes. Yep.
There's just so much variety in most of those 80s songs that, somebody, well, what about piano? Don't you do? I think I have one song where I actually do a piano, across the keyboard piano.
Mm-hmm.
I think 1 or 2 songs where I've got a little bit of Hammond, but it's more of a kind of pad in the background kind of thing. So I'm not using those standard things. And I've spent years and years playing, blues, classic rock, roots rock type Hammond and piano, but not this band.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's not atypical for me to need 5, 6, 7 or more sounds on any one song.
Yep. Okay. So I want to look into some details, but before we get into the racks and everything, can you just show us what's possible with one keyboard? Like, is there a song that you can loosely demo, and then we can kind of talk?
Well, sure. I mean, the one that I'm going to talk about here is one of them. I got a couple, but is "Bye Bye Love" by the Cars, which has the piano in it. It's also got the higher piano during the pre-chorus, where it's kind of got a little soft synth here. Or something like that, right? At the same time, during the second verse, it's got a... let me turn the vibrato off. During the choruses, it's got kind of a bass piano thing going. And then during many of the choruses, it's got what I call a drone sound up top. And then, of course, the only switch I make on this is for the lead with the... that kind of thing, right?
Yes.
But I don't know how many that was, but that's not atypical. And you think in the olden days, you would have had to have several keyboards or synthesizers to pull off that or switch between sounds or something, But here I've got them all across the one keyboard.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So what's your like framework mentally? Like, how are you picking your layouts?
Well, first thing I do is somebody tells, well, like, I'll just use this song. Somebody says, learn Bye Bye Love. Okay. So the first thing I do is go listen to it and see what are all the sounds that I need to cover in it. Greg Hawkes put a billion little Philly little sounds in the things, and you don't necessarily need to do every one of those, but you got to get the important ones, right?
Yeah.
And so I listen to what are all the things I'm going to try to cover here. Then I start thinking about, okay, how much space do each of those need on a keyboard? Do they need the whole keyboard? Rarely, if ever.
Right.
Do they need just a couple octaves? That's pretty common for a lot of stuff, like this piano. And, 2 octaves is plenty for that little piano. For my little bass piano, I only need 3 notes. So you'll notice I've only got the 3 or a half octave dedicated to that. You'll also notice that if you can hear it, I don't know if it's coming through clear, that's an octave. That's a piano octave. And I did that with a little script that adds the octave to the note that I'm playing.
And is that just for the scriptlet? Is that just like a logic thing? Like if this note, send now. Like.
Yep, it is. It's just a send now, the current note plus the octave, and I don't know whether I'm actually playing the lower one, the higher one. I can't remember, but it's sending the other one, And and then so I start thinking, where can they fit on the keyboard? The little drone part, it's really just those notes. So I only dedicate 5 notes to that sound up there, right? So it's really a paradigm shift of the brain where you quit thinking that this is a piano with a couple splits, or this is an organ down here and a piano up here. And you start thinking this is 4, 5 or more little keyboards stacked end to end that I can have as long as I want and be anything I want. So in this one, I got an acoustic piano, I got a synth part, I got a soft synth part, I got an electric piano, and I got a drone sound up here. And then with just a quick switch, I got the lead sound. So that's kind of the pattern that I do. Now, sometimes I'll go through and I'll lay all that out and think it's the right thing and realize, that'd be better if this one was here. That'd be better if I played it with this hand instead of that hand, and kind of make some adjustments there. So it's rarely for anything this complicated do I get it right first shot. So it's a little bit of trial and error, but it's a lot of fun too.
And I guess that ends up, I'm like watching you play and I'm going, oh, it's like an organ. Or you're like, you end up playing like an organist almost, so I'm like reading between the lines here a little bit, but because of the geography being somewhat fixed because of the framework you're using, you've got left hand playing right hand stuff probably pretty frequently.
Well, yeah, this is an example. The question becomes, how do you know where what part is or where to put what part?
Yeah.
And I usually put the main parts where I would play it if it were, if this were just a regular row, I guess it was probably a CP30 back for him.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I think, now where the heck am I going to do? Well, I can either try to play the piano part, which is going on at the same time, and get my right hand up there doing it somehow, or I could do a shift and do it here. But I think, just do that. And, that's where some of those piano lessons are coming in handy, that I'm pretty much can do most of what I can do with my right hand with my left hand.
Yes.
And I find myself doing that kind of thing a lot. Let me give you one other example. The Hall & Oates song Out of Touch. I've got it's kind of that chorus piano that goes at the beginning, right? And then the polysynthesis marimba thing that comes in, mallet thing. And I thought, well, again, I could try to move the main part to my left hand and play it up here somewhere. But heck, I got all this space. Why don't I just play it with my left hand? And then it works It's great, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
So
It's so fun to watch all of that happen, Ken. That makes a ton of sense. It's so fun to watch. And the sounds are like so spot on.
well, I appreciate that. If I am, I attribute it to the fact that it's funny. My band right now, five piece, two guys, the singer and the bass player, were both born in the '80s.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you guys, I was playing these songs, literally playing these same songs while you guys were in diapers,
Yep.
and I had the advantage of playing these the first time around, knowing how to get the sounds on the keyboards I had at the time, which, for example, included a Jupiter 8. I had a
Yep.
Jupiter 8. I knew
And
how
are
to
you using
program a
that here?
Jupiter 8. Yes, I use the Arturia. I love to mention this. I'm using Arturia V Collection heavily, and within that, the ones that I know and love and know how to program, which include the Jupiter 8, the Mini Moog, the Prophet 5, the OBXA, and a few of the others. And then for a lot of the mallet sounds, the more PCM kind of rompler type sounds, I am using Roland Zonology sounds.
Okay. Okay. Um, I guess this is a bit of an opinion question, but do you tend to gravitate more towards what was historically being used or more towards what you're faster on working in?
Well, for the analog subtractive stuff, absolutely, I go to what I knew and love and knew how to program and everything. I could sit there and whip up any sound that a Jupiter 8 is capable of making on a Jupiter 8 because I
Right.
know how to do it.
Right.
We talked earlier, if it's more like a DX7 sound, we talked about there's nobody in the world that knows how to program a DX7, and if they say they do, they're lying. For those kind of things, or some of the, like I said, the rompler type sounds, one thing I like about Xenology is that it has a huge collection of very well organized sounds that make it easy to find. For instance, the marimba kind of things, or layer it with a couple things, or whatever you need to do.
Yep.
So those, other than maybe tweaking an envelope or a filter a little bit, I don't mess with too much.
Yep. That's interesting. So you're just so comfortable on the Jupiter that that's what you're going to grab first, unless it's
well,
something
for
else.
those of us who went through it, we can usually hear the difference in sound between a Jupiter, an OBXA, a Prophet.
Right.
They have a
Yes.
little bit of distinctive sounds, and sometimes you can look up and see what the person used, whoever recorded it, and kind of go with that. But usually, most of those things are sort of interchangeable. Yeah. Sometimes it's just, what do I feel like using today, and go with that.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, I would love to see what your wiring view looks like for any of these tunes. Can you
Okay,
show
let's
us
go to
around?
Bye Bye Love. I'm going to switch to
Okay.
wiring view here.
Okay.
And that's what I've got right there. Okay.
Okay. Great.
So I do my sustain pedal separately. I'm feeding it to the electric piano inputs, which I'm using actually a Keys of the 70s, along with a Wurlitzer, which I think comes from Arturia, running that through a reverb. And that's my piano.
Gotcha. Just
All
because
right.
this is really clever, and I think probably some people will have missed this, and just to make it more obvious, why do you have a MIDI in block dedicated to just sustain?
Well, in my case, it's sort of required
Okay.
because keep in mind, my pedal, my Pacer foot pedal, is not plugged into the keyboard.
Okay.
It's plugged into like a regular sustain pedal would be. It's plugged into just another USB channel on the computer.
Okay.
But aside from that, I think it's a good idea. And I may have seen a blog article or something about this a while back. It's a good idea because then it's easier to control. You can set it to do multiple things at once. For instance, I've got that one sustain pedal controlling both that one as well as that one, right? So I can do.
So
that's the answer to that.
Just for further clarity, that MIDI in block is only accepting sustain pedal messages. Is that correct?
Yeah, at least I hope so. I'm going to embarrass myself here if not. But yeah,
yep,
I've
there
got
it is.
everything blocked pretty much except sustain. Yep.
And that is now because you've done it that way, you can route that sustain to anywhere you want it to go. It's
Right.
like you have, which is very difficult to do in basically any other program.
Yeah,
Like, very hard to do.
I love it, and on my pacer, which by the way, it's got 10 switches or pedals. I don't know what you'd call them.
Mhm.
You could program them any way you want, and within GP make them do anything you want. Well, sustain's so common that I dedicated the bottom right one to sustain.
Yep.
I do
And
have
it
it set up
sends
as a favorite here. If you look at my favorites, where are my
a
favorites?
little
Right
lower,
there.
a little lower. Yep.
Yeah, there. So there's sustain.
Yep.
So anytime I need the sustain, I just grab it from right there.
Yep. And for folks who are watching, if you right mouse click on any block or group of blocks, you can make it a favorite. And then you can really easily access it. Okay.
So continuing. Did you have a question?
Just one question. So you actually set it up in your pedal to send CC64? Or you're using a widget in GP?
I think it is doing that. I'm looking here. Yes. I'm sorry, I was looking at the little display on the pedal.
Yeah,
but
no,
yes.
totally fine. So it sends the 64. You're not transforming it in Gig Performer. Gotcha.
No, I mean, I could, but it's so particular.
It's so
I just
common.
didn't feel the need.
Yep, makes sense. Okay.
Continuing, like I said, I've got the acoustic piano octaves there. They're octave because I'm using a little striplet to add the thing we talked about.
Yep.
Over here is the section, and if you look at it, it's just I'd have to scroll down here.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that little piece right there for the and that's, from that sound, you can tell that's a mini mode. So, or at least to me, it sounds like it. I think he probably used a Korg or something, but that's a classic mini mode type sound, right?
Yep. How are you getting the vibrato on that? Is it the vibrato comes in as you hold it down or after touch?
That's interesting. About the only thing I don't like about this keyboard is the lack of aftertouch on it. It does not have.
It doesn't have aftertouch.
It does not.
Whoa! Did not know that.
Great. Other than that, and in fact, I'll get on my soapbox for a second and say I wish the darn controller manufacturers would make 88 key, unweighted or semi-weighted keyboards with aftertouch, plus have all the buttons and stuff. Mm-hmm. I have not found that combination yet. You can get weighted. You can get. I think there's one available with aftertouch, but it doesn't have the buttons. Mm-hmm. So, okay, off the soapbox.
There you go.
So how do I do it? Originally, and again, I know you probably can't see this, I would use my expression pedal to add it. But I don't want to do that. And it's always predictable what it needs to do. Mm-hmm. So what I did, one of the nice things about Arturia and maybe other software is that in addition to replicating, in fact, I'll just show it here real quick. Here we go. In addition to all the standard Minimoog stuff, right? Mm-hmm. You can go to this advanced tab and do something called a motion recorder, where it's like a little envelope generator almost that over time can change the setting of anything that you want to send it to. And in this case, my mod wheel, which works just perfect for that.
Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah, I love opening the advanced tab in all of those Arturia things because it gives you kind of the newer edge, right? With the access to the analog, the older sounds. Okay, what's next down this line?
Then we got this little part here that's during the pre-choruses where it's going. And it's only those 5 notes plus the black keys, right?
Yes.
That's all I need, so that's all I set aside for it. Was that little bit. All right.
And you did that in the Jupiter?
No, that's another Minimoog.
Okay.
Because it is mono and.
Okay.
The only thing I know better than a Jupiter is a Minimoog.
Gotcha.
And,
gotcha.
Then for the little drone part up top, that's a Jupiter.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it's polyphonic, and even though you can make the Minimoog polyphonic in Arturia, which is kind of cool because then you kind of get a memory Moog, I guess. I tend to, if it's an obvious monophonic part, I'll use the mini moog a lot of times. If it's polyphonic, I'll use one of the other ones. Again, it's only like 5 notes plus the black keys, which I don't use there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the only thing that happens is, and of course I got to go here to switch this. I switch. I've got the, and that is just my another mini moog sound. And it works great.
Is it a different Rackspace or a variation?
That is a snapshot. I've tried variations. I've tried different Rackspaces. And if I went through my whole list, there's probably examples of each I'm still using. But I've lately come to just like the snapshots, because what I do is, you can see here, I set up buttons that are basically enabling or disabling certain sounds.
Yep.
And as I move, it changes them to what I need.
So for folks who may not know, can you explain what a snapshot is?
Yeah, I hope I get it right here. I always get it to work, but sometimes I don't know how. Basically, you can go to one of these, set it the way you want it, and then click the little snapshot button over here, and it'll sort of remember it from a song part perspective versus the Rackspace perspective.
Awesome.
It's sort of like it remembers what things you clicked on or off on sort of the front panel here.
Yep, absolutely. And it can be helpful too, especially if you're a setlist player, because you're making your adjustments during rehearsal or whatever, and they're like, oh, this is what I want now. Boom, and you can remember it, and it just stays there.
There's a couple where the sections are so different from each other that I've used a separate Rackspace. Money for Nothing's an example of that, where I actually go to a separate Rackspace altogether.
Wow.
For the long intro versus the the rest of the song.
Yeah.
This is another interesting one that's got a ton of parts in it, if we got time to go through it.
We definitely do. I would love to hear this one.
So first of all, I'm going to qualify that I have not really learned the parts to this yet. I've just set up the sounds.
Okay.
So it's generally, I've got, and I don't know, you guys can't really see me sliding those sliders, can you?
I can see your hands moving. I just pulled.
I've got a add part here. That, by the way, I can bring in higher strings with my expression. I'm literally just stomping on the sustain rising synthesizers. Now, the interesting thing about them, and this is another paradigm shift you have to make in your head. But we talked about playing parts left-handed. We talked about little bitty sections of the keyboard dedicated to something. The other thing is that the notes you're playing aren't always the notes you're getting.
Yes.
Okay. For instance, these three. I'm playing the lowest A, B, and C on the keyboard, but they're going to 3 different kind of chords.
Yep.
And how did I do that? Let me go to
I think ripchord is a really easy way to implement that.
I either didn't know about that or didn't do it or something. So I wrote a little scriptlet.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, can you show folks what's possible with that? Cool.
Well, you see that. So basically what it's saying, if it's the A, play it, transposing those. And if it's the B, play those. And if it's the C, play those.
Yep. Yeah. So, and this scriptlets, by the way, if you're looking at this and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not a coder, like I don't understand how this works. We have a lot of pre-built stuff floating around in the forums. So if you need something functional like this, it is possible.
And I do not do a lot of this. And what I do is mainly along this line of just adding additional notes or moving stuff around.
Yes.
I'll show one
Yes.
more example of it in the song. What song is it? It's Dance Hall Days. It's got the, because you're doing the, and it does a little thing at the end. Okay, well, my saxophone is monophonic, but what I really want to play is, well, I can't, so I've did another little transpose thing, tied it to a pedal that brings in, I step on the little foot switch, it de-bypasses I think those are xenology sounds there. You get that little horn section, so I got the whole thing going, with the...
Oh man, it's so spot on. Okay, I'm also seeing something here that is really interesting for some folks, perhaps. It looks like you maybe have an expression pedal controlling multiple widgets at the same time. Is that true?
Yeah, and that's another paradigm shift you have to go through. I used to think,
Ken,
man, I need
so sorry. Is there any way you can easily make your microphone louder? If not, that's okay. Some folks are saying your voice is a little quiet.
How's that? A little better?
It is, but now it's looping back.
Sorry,
it's okay.
We had quite the technical journey trying to get all this to work.
We did. We had.
I'll just try to get closer to the mic here for it.
Okay.
So that was definitely another paradigm shift for me, was that I don't need the expression pedal for every separate sound that needs an expression pedal all at the same time. Mm-hmm. I'm playing one song, but I'm playing only one part of it at a time. So I can use the expression pedal to do something on that part while I'm playing that part. And I can use the expression pedal to do something completely different on another part when I'm playing that part. For example, on this song, it's going along, and it's got some kind of little whooshy sounds that he plays during sort of the verses, but then it goes into so all I do is push the expression pedal down, and it turns into strings, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that same expression pedal is used to bring the saxophone, or not. I've also got vibrato on another foot pedal. And of course, on the other pedal. So,
yes.
Yeah, it becomes a coordination effort between hands and feet sometime, but
yeah,
you can kind of do any of it.
Are you using widget groups to achieve that?
Yeah, sometimes it's exactly what I'm doing is widget groups, or just having the same controller assigned. Sometimes I think you do that.
And is it easy enough for you to show? It looks like the D50 and the pigments, like you've reversed your. Yeah. I don't know if you're able to.
Yeah, during the verse is going, and then when it goes, I was up on craze, and it has a little kind of type sound in there. So when the pigments and D50 are up, making that sound, the strings aren't there, but then it gets into that little chorus or pre-chorus. You need the... And I can switch right back and forth between strings and whooshy sound.
Yeah. Are you able to show it in edit view? I don't know how hard that is to do, so folks can see the widget itself. So
yeah.
Okay. So if you
so that's like the string level, and the value over here is that.
Yep.
The D50 levels you'll see are that, but I've probably done a reversal somewhere, I'm guessing. Yeah, I've inverted the MIDI on a couple of them.
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why having one widget per parameter can be such a captivating proposition, right? Like you could have one widget controlling multiple things in some softwares, which I see the draw, but because you have 3 different ones in this case, each
Mm-hmm.
parameter has its own range, right?
Mm-hmm.
Each parameter is going in
Yeah.
its own direction, and it's doing it all from a single control source,
Right.
which gives you, such I don't even granular control that you wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
get with a single knob.
Yep,
Which is
absolutely, and it's nice, and that's one of the reasons I can do this is because I can use this one expression pedal to affect different parameters on different sounds on different parts of the keyboard at different times when I'm playing them.
yeah, and it looks like you mapped these individually. These are not grouped, right?
These particular ones are probably not, I don't think.
Okay.
Now, if you look at these over here, maybe they are. I can't see what we got here. Widget
I think
link,
we
no.
would see a little A or B if it was.
I promise I've done it before, but I guess not on this Rackspace.
Yeah, totally fine. So it's just cool. I sometimes hear folks be like, oh, one widget to control multiple things. But I'm like, in this case, like what you're achieving is made possible by one widget per control. And the widget ranges are so powerful because actually, can you talk about that, Ken? So when you've set the widget range, why does that matter? What does that allow you to do?
Well, sometimes it's a matter of I just I want one sound to go away completely. Let me see if I can go back to that same song. Where is it? Dance All Days. I hope you can hear this. Okay, that's both of them kind of at full volume. The pigments and the D50. When I come off, well, in this case, you could still hear one of them a little more than the other one behind the strings, I don't know how clear that is there, but it is there in real life. And, and just because different things have different sensitivities, depending on what frequency range they're at, frequency can play a lot in our perceived level of stuff, right? Things that are high pitched tend to cut through more sometimes. So,
but the adjustments of the levels make it so you can go from 0 to 127 on your controller, but only affect a sound a certain amount.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
So that gives you this ability. You're not changing all of the levels the same amount. You're changing them all different amounts, and you can do different amounts on a widget from the same
like
amount.
If you look at the pigments in the D50, even though I'm going all the way down on the knob, it's only going, the D50 about a little more than halfway down, and the pigment's not down much at all.
Yes. Yep. Which is just super, super key. Okay, folks who are watching, if you have questions for Ken, Ken knows a lot about all of this stuff. So if you have questions about his rig, if you have questions in general, put them in the comments because we'd love to have
if you don't mind, can I show one more cool thing just because it's very different?
I want you to show several more cool things.
Okay. Well, we do Eyes Without a Face, Billy Idol, and of course it's got the part into it. And again, but one of the things I did, and I remember the first time my current band got together, first time we met, and we played a few songs, we got to the chorus part, and it's got the female vocal in it, and we didn't have a girl or anything. And I pulled out this. Which are just samples. And you'd ask me, well, how'd you get that? Yeah. Well, for my studio days, I knew quite a few singers, and one of my main ones I worked with, I called her up or texted her and said, hey, would you mind singing these 5 or 6 notes for me? Just record them, same tempo, same, pitch and everything as the song, and then just send it to me. And she did. And I think I bought her a pizza, and I sampled them in, and now I've got... That turns a lot of heads when you play that live for people or even for the band members the first time. Yes.
I love it. I think it turned my head when you were demoing it the first time. I was like, whoa, where's that coming from? What sampler are you using, Ken?
For those little simple samples and my little one-shot samples, I've got them all over the stinking place.
Mhm.
I'm using the Waves CR8 Create. I don't know what they call it. Create
Okay.
CR8
Okay.
sampler. Um, I also have Contact if I wanted to do something really major, but for these
Mhm.
little one-shot sound effectsy kind of things, for example, what's the other one I do a lot of? Simply Irresistible's got a little type stuff in it that I put down there for that. The Rock the Casbah's got the little sound effects that are in that. Sometimes I use it for something more musical like Safety Dance. I just sampled the type thing.
Mhm.
Um,
The chat is
so yeah,
blowing up with questions. I'm like, let's. Do you mind if we take some?
go ahead.
So, first question's coming in from Jose, and he wants to know CPU/RAM used on this demo.
Um, I can tell you most of my, it varies so much by patch, but some of mine, like this one, the Safety Dance, which has that sound, that, plus these, it looks like it's in the 30s, 35% or something like that.
Yep.
I've got patches where I push the crap out of it and it'll get up
Mhm.
to 80, 85%.
Mhm.
I've got a couple where it's even lower, 15, 20%. I would say on average, and keep in mind, this is very keyboard heavy music, 40 to 55%
Mhm.
is sort of my normal range where you see stuff.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and what like processor are you using, or like, yeah, what's
Oh
inside your
God, this is
computer?
you would ask me this. I've got this on my notes on my phone, but my phone's
it's
up
it
there showing the
it's
thing.
okay.
It's a Windows 10. It's an MSI Raider. I think it's like 2.6 or 8 or whatever.
Okay.
Multi 468. I don't know, something core.
Okay.
So,
Okay. And then Mike wants to know, do you worry about a computer crash?
well, keep in mind that I've been a software engineer by day for almost as long as I've been a musician,
Mhm.
and the I've had computers crash on me, including when I was running the studio, my main studio DAW, but almost all my crashes have been due, either in the old days, everything was up for grabs, but were due to the mechanical hard drives. Um, since they've
Interesting.
gone to solid state hard drives in the last however many years it's been now, I think um, the solidity and the dependability of these computers is just fantastic. I think about my work computer, which is over to my right by about 6 feet.
Mhm.
I've had it for years, and it just chugs along. My DAW sitting behind me has gone for 10 or 12 years now.
Mhm.
A lot of heavy use, not as much anymore, but just chugs along.
Mhm. Mhm.
Do I worry about it? Yeah, but I've had the old analog keyboards crap out on me too. Um,
Mhm.
so I do, for full disclosure here,
Mhm. Mhm.
travel with a backup laptop, which I've never had to use.
Awesome. Well, that's good to know. What is your sample rate and buffer size on this set? Do you know?
44 and 128.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, cool. Then let's see here. Got more coming in. What kind of brass VST are you using?
Well, I don't have any good demos of it right here, but if I need like really as good as I can get brass for a section, I'm usually combine the NI session horns with some stuff from Xenology and or some stuff from the Korg Triton collection. And
Gotcha.
between kind of mixing and matching that, I can get some stuff. I unfortunately don't. None of these songs have kind of pure brass on them,
Okay.
unfortunately. For saxophone, it's the Swam SWAM saxophone. They're just crazy good.
Yeah.
So
Uh, so good. I've heard some people do some really wild stuff with the Swam saxophones.
yeah,
Um, okay.
and I don't sit there and try to be the perfect saxophone player with it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were doing something really saxophone led and intensive, I'd have to really work at it or think about it. But for these little fill in parts on these songs, it works perfectly fine.
Yep. Yep. Um, okay. Another question from Jose. How he's asking how long it takes to turn on your computer and open the Gig Performer session.
Well, the computer itself will go from pushing the start button to ready to go in about 10 seconds. It's very fast with a solid state drive. And I should say, I went through and took the advice of the article that I got from the Gig Performer site about optimizing your Windows computer.
Mhm.
And this thing has been stripped bare bones. I don't even see a battery icon on it. That's kind of how far I went with it. So I did everything I possibly could to get it down. So it boots extremely fast. I don't do this, and this goes without saying. It's towards the other question about computer reliability. I don't do any other kind of surfing or applications or, you know, do my finances or anything on this computer. This
Mhm.
is a dedicated Gig Performer computer. The
Mhm.
only time I go online is to download sounds or something,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm. Yep, absolutely. And
or to do this.
or to
So
do this. Yeah, the other thing too, a lot of folks are like totally have a dedicated computer. I'm like the same computer that I'm streaming on right now is the same computer that I play live with, and I also have no problems. So it is,
yeah.
it's like it is possible, and I think it depends on your level of comfort. Just
Mm-hmm.
the other thing too is like trust is built with time and tests, right? So if you have a rig built on your computer and you begin to understand how it works and use it and you test it, then all of a sudden you start to have a little bit more confidence walking into situations.
Well, yeah. I mean, the first
Right?
time I went out with it, I was scared to death that it would do something, right?
Sure.
But then you do it time after time after gig after gig after gig, and now I don't think much more about it than I would turning on a hardware keyboard.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about controlling volume in Contact. Um, and so I don't. Do you use any Contact volume here? You have to drag the little automator over. That might be too hard
Yeah,
to show.
honestly, when I'm controlling volume, most of the time, I mean, sometimes I'm controlling the main volume of whatever the synth or whatever is,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of times I'll just control the level of a mixer.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and
Yep.
then I don't
Makes a
have to
ton of
worry
sense.
about it.
Makes a ton of sense. So for whoever's asking that question, the mixer is a good option. There's also an automation button where you can kind of drag a number over, and then you can map to that number. Okay, let's see if there are any other questions here. I think I caught them all. Okay, really powerful. Ken, is there anything else that you wanted to show? David wants to come and talk. We're gonna try, David. We'll see how the audio goes. Hold on. Um, give us 1 second. I've got to bring Ken over here. Ken pad, and then let's see. I'll add David.
Hey, David.
All right. Let's see if we can hear you, David. I cannot hear you. I don't know what happened. Um, I could hear you earlier though. I don't know. Uh, I'm not sure. If you type it out, I'll read it. If you want me to do that. Um, I see the metronome on. Does your band play to a click? Okay, Chris wants to know if your band plays to a click.
Not currently. By the way, I have a dedicated button on my controller that turns the metronome on.
Oh, nice.
I do that sometimes just so the drummer can hear the initial tempo. It only goes to high ems or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is we probably will because we're looking at doing some backing tracks, and we may need to have a click for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I play with a click often and have gotten very comfortable with it. Um, David wrote
Well,
in
I would
this.
just say that if you remember from my story back in the '90s when I was doing it with no drummer and stuff, and then when we added the drummer, yeah, we had a click big time every single song. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time, the way we did it was we ran a line out to a little mini Gorilla guitar amp, which we had on a mic stand pointed right at his face, and that's how we did it.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, I guess you just had to get it done, right? I mean, we
Yep.
needed some
Hey,
solution
it
and you
worked.
found one. It worked. Um, David was talking about reliability and he typed in the chat here, adults and kids throw their computers around very casually and laptops just handle it. Reliability is really the least of one's concerns. Yeah, I think I agree with David there. People really do. Yeah, the computers can handle a good amount. And to your point, Ken, about the solid state drives, I mean,
Yep.
absolutely.
90% of the problems I've ever had when a computer died were the
Mhm.
drive.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Progress 888. How does Ken remember where he has the sounds mapped for all the songs he plays?
I wish I had an answer that would help him on this.
Okay.
All I can say, I've been playing keyboards for so long and multiple keyboards. Back in the day where you had to have a string synth and a Minimoog, and you had to have a polysynth, and you had a clav, and you had a Rhodes, and you had a Hammond. You just knew where to go for stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, I try to just put them where it would make sense to do it.
Yep.
If I'm going to play the main piano part, it's going to be right in here.
Yep.
If I'm going to do some weird sound effect, it's probably going to be on the very ends of the keyboard where it's out of the way.
Yep.
After there was a time where I was going to be a sub for a Cars band, and
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn like 35 Cars songs all within a month or something.
Wow.
And that's a lot. And
It's a lot of tunes.
at
Yeah.
that time, I was using two controllers, and I actually mapped out on my screen what parts were on what part of the keyboard and which keyboard, and had that on a tablet showing in front of my face. But most of these songs, I at this point, I just sort of kind of know where they are.
Yeah. I think too, I don't know, Ken, if you would say this is true, but I sort of find I try and honor my first instinct so that
Yeah.
when I go then to honor my first instinct when I'm playing, I find the sounds where I
Hmm.
instinctually put them. And the other thing too is if you're playing with a band like this, you had rehearsal, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you practiced, and by the time your performance ready, I mean, how many hours in on a song are you? Like,
Exactly. And
um,
and it's like if I'll go back to what was it? Gosh, out of touch. I've got the where's it? Well, if I'm going to be playing that little mallet part, and I know where the notes are, it's just a matter of which octave am I supposed to be in, right?
right.
Well, maybe I'm supposed to be in this octave. No, that ain't right. But if I played it there, I could just jump up. I hear that it's the wrong octave, but most people don't like to be spread out with their arms. I got a couple songs where I have to do it, but
Mm-hmm.
most of the
Mm-hmm.
time we're comfortable sort of playing with our arms in front of our shoulders, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's where I tend to put parts, if I
Yep.
can.
Yep. Absolutely. Makes a ton of sense to me. Yeah. I mean, it is a good question. Chris wrote in, if I ever have an issue at a gig, 99% of the time it's a cable.
It's funny. It's funny. I used to have after doing the studio for 10 years, I
Yeah.
had a mantra that if there's a problem going on, 75% of the time it's user error,
Mm-hmm.
20% of the time it's a cable, and only 5% of the time is it hardware or something.
Yep. Yep. Cables. And it's not a bad idea to have a backup USB.
Well, I've got, I carry like 3 sets of cables with me because,
Yep.
frankly, the cables and maybe the connections are the most flimsy part of the setup, if you will. These little,
Yep.
I hate USB-C for this, by
Mm-hmm.
the way, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what things seem to go.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, I carry that. I carry the extra laptop I talked about, and I do carry an extra little interface, Motu M4, I think it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Love the Mode 2 M4. Love it.
Yeah. I only went to
Okay.
this PreSonus because I needed more I/O for being able to do, the backing tracks out of it, plus maybe a separate bass out of it, plus maybe a separate click track out of it. So I needed the I more the O than the I, but the I/O.
Yep. Yep. Um, Friends, this is last call for extra questions. I do have more questions for you, Ken. Somebody just wrote in. I'm sorry for not being able to pronounce your name. This is a question you should definitely ask in the user forums. I'm going to tell you probably, but it will require scripting. But go to the user forums because that is where people will be able to help you. David's shaking his head no. But that's okay. User forums is a great place to ask that. Okay, cool. So, Ken, this is the question that I ask everybody all the time, and I guess I forgot to... David wrote in, you can do that just by mapping to a widget. Right, of course. Of course you can. This is the question that I ask everybody, and I didn't give you a heads up, so I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, Ken. But if you were going to give one word of advice to a brand new gig performer user just getting started, what would you advise them?
Start simple, but realize that what I see with a lot of new gig performer users is they're trying to treat gig performer either like a DAW or like a piece of hardware. Yes. I see so many, how do I switch the presets on my Jupiter or whatever? You don't. As a short answer, you have a separate Rackspace if you need it. Put it on whatever you need it to be, and that's it, So you have to think a little different on this stuff. The Rackspace isn't so that you can start switching presets on everything. The Rackspace is the preset,
Ken, you've just summed up years of answering questions in a very short moment there. But yes, absolutely. The framework for gig performer is Rackspace based. It's not presets. It's not trying to deal with hardware and all of that stuff. And so if you make that shift early, then you're definitely set up for better success, without a doubt. Yeah. Wow. Well, Ken, this has been awesome. There are some people asking how they can most easily contact you. I'm assuming Facebook?
Yeah, well, there's a Facebook link there.
Yep.
They're welcome to message me there. I try to see all my, what is it called in Facebook, pending messages or whatever.
Yep.
Message requests, I think it is. Also, we should have a link to get to the keyboard players and cover bands group there. Yep. What I will mention about that, this is a private group, and we do not always have it open for new people to join, period. I know the admins are very much of the mantra quality over quantity when it comes to the membership. We try to control that a lot, but I did get them to open it up for anybody from this meeting or group that would like to go over there and join. Just briefly, it's for just what it sounds like, keyboard players and cover bands. It's not for your original music. It's not for you to go on and show how well you can jam. It's to go there and ask legitimate questions about being in a band playing keyboards.
Yep. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to clear that. It's definitely, if you're a keyboard player playing in cover bands, the value there is so high. Chris Bartley wrote in, the Rackspace is the preset. I want that on a shirt. We'll put that out into the universe and see if we can.
I would say it this way, and I'll get in trouble with David for this one. I wish a Rackspace was named something like Scene or something like that, because that's what it is. It took me forever to figure out what a Rackspace was. The Rackspace is your scene. It is your multi. It is your combi, whatever they're called on the big workstations,
Yeah, sure. So would you ever consider going back to hardware?
There's only one circumstance that I probably would. Again, you probably can't see it, but back over my right shoulder here is my Nord Stage 3.
Oh, yeah.
In the event that I went to a band that was 95% Hammond and piano and electric piano, it was a really easy way to do that. So that would probably be, the circumstance in which I would do that. But I'm very happy playing this 80s music right now, so not likely to be in the near future.
Awesome. Ken, I'm like, I want to do this episode all day. I want to hear every one of your songs. Actually, for folks who do want to hear your songs, do you have a list of upcoming gigs somewhere? No. Okay.
Well, keep in mind, this is a brand new band. If you go to my Facebook page, you can see 3 or 4 songs we put up there.
Okay. Awesome.
We've played exactly 1 gig so far, and we've got a number more lined up, but At the moment, they're not until the summer.
Okay.
We're working on that. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, this band's only been together, a couple months now.
Okay. Wow, and a lot of progress very quickly on your setup. So that's really cool. All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for being with us. Ken, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time. I feel like I learned a ton from watching you. So
Thank you
thank you.
for having me on here.
And folks, next week, Chris Bartley coming on for the coolest use of listening to a drummer with Ableton and sending the time over back to GP to keep everything in sync without a click. All right, folks, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again, Ken.